This episode is brought to you by Samsung. Unfold the all-new Galaxy Z Fold 4 and expand your world. With Flex Mode, it stands on its own, so you're hands-free to get more done during calls. And with multi-window view, you can use up to 3 apps at the same time. Plus, the edge-to-edge screen allows you to fully immerse yourself in your favorite games and shows. Visit Samsung.com to learn more about Galaxy Z Fold 4.
This episode is brought to you by Paycor, the HR and payroll software made for leaders. It's never been harder to recruit, hire, and engage workers. That's why HR leaders and frontline managers depend on Paycor for all things people management, from onboarding and performance reviews to compensation and benefits. Learn more at paycor.com/leaders.
I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Guillaume Wiatr.
People will buy a story, but they will almost die for a narrative. And that's a key difference here. We are in an era where we need businesses to think of themselves as movements. And so if you think as your business as a movement, you need to have a narrative. You need to have a narrative that invites people to join you on a journey to transform either your company, your customers, or your environment, your ecosystem.
Guillaume is the author of Strategic Narrative, a simple method that business leaders can use to make everyone understand their business, get behind it, and believe in it. His company, MetaHelm, guides CEOs, founders, and business owners to align teams and accelerate innovation adoption. A former big firm strategy consultant, Guillaume has founded 4 ventures. He is sought after by senior executives of companies like Alaska Airlines, the Gates Foundation, Generations for Peace, AIG, L'Oreal, Spencer Stuart, Gap, Google, Microsoft, and the US and French governments. Guillaume, welcome to On Brand.
Hey, Nick, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on your show. It's great.
I am so excited to chat with you, and I love your book. You know, a lot of guests, will send a book over, and you can look through it. But when you sent yours over, I don't know if you remember in the email what you said to me, but as the parent of 5 kids, and 5 kids who are often confused about what it is I actually do, I loved. Would you share with the guests the story that you told me on your kids and your book?
Yeah, I don't have that email exactly in mind, but I must have said something like, thanks to that book, my kids finally understand what I do, and it's because I when I wrote this book, I thought, what kind of book would make me happy to read, and what book has actually stood out for me in the recent years, and the image of a kid's book came to mind, and I don't know why, but Austin Kleon's book have that feel of very very small, digestible. That's what I mean. Very small in format, very big in the way it changes your ideas, your thoughts, and it's very illustrated. It's just a joy to open this kind of book, and I wanted to do something that felt a little bit like that as well. And so my book is fairly short and it's very illustrated, and I put as much effort into it as I could to just give the essence of what I truly believe in my space.
Well, Guillaume, I'm glad you said children's book, because I was actually, because I'd looked at it previously, but before I hopped on for our interview this morning, one of my colleagues is having a baby here later in the month, and my kids are older. I haven't shopped for little kids' books, like baby books, in a long time, and I was doing some shopping. And I was having fun just because I'm, like you, an Austin Kleon fan of images and things like that. And so I was having fun looking at these books. And then I went back in prep for this conversation and opened this up, and I felt like this is very much of of that same mind. But I said I'm glad you brought it up because I feel like in our grown-up, button-down business world, being some authors might take that the wrong way. That don't call my very important business book. Don't say that it's like a children's book. We're afraid of this simplicity when I think it's that simplicity that helps our ideas, right?
I think so. And, I'm a strong believer of not wasting anybody's time. Actually, I treat my readers' time as more valuable than my time. And so I think it's my responsibility when I publish something to make it as easily accessible, as time efficient as possible. Not to make it too short as, necessarily. Some concepts require longer explanations. So I am not in favor of simplicity just for the sake of simplicity. I think sometimes complexity is necessary to dive into a topic. But these are my tenets, for writing: is treat the reader's time as more valuable than yours.
I love that. I teach something very similar. I think Josh Bernoff in his book "Writing Without
Yes.
Bullshit" calls it the iron
Iron-
imperative.
Yeah, exactly, and thank you for saying this, because as I was saying this, like, who did I hear this from again? And that's from Josh Bernoff. Wonderful, amazing book, Writing Without Bullshit. Yes.
It is one of the best books on writing for the modern world of work. But speaking of the modern world of work, you talk a lot about, and the title of the aforementioned book itself is strategic narrative. And you kind of contrast this with something that we hear about a lot, whether it's articles on websites, talks at conferences, which is business storytelling. I feel like that's a real popular topic. And talk a bit about why you prefer the idea of strategic narrative and how they're different.
Yeah, absolutely. Business storytelling has been one of my influence for many years now. It's not a popular topic; it's a super popular topic. Everybody wants to be able to tell a good story. It has been repeated to so many people in our generation that now it's a given. It's not a question. It's more like, how do you do this? And I work in a very specific context. So my point of view comes from that experience, which is to help transformative companies and transformative leaders of those companies. A transformative company could be a company that is trying to transform their industry, transform the life of people, or transform society or their environment. So whatever the case is, these companies require a specific kind of leadership and a specific kind of communication and branding and organizational models even. And so I've been working in that space for over 23 years. I'm someone who lives in the trenches of reinvention. I'm a practitioner. I operate all over the world with companies who do peacekeeping, food industry, technology companies. And when I came across business storytelling many years ago, I thought this would be very valuable for the people I help, and including my company. I tried it by the book at the beginning, and I guess that's probably what many people do. I'm assuming. Well, that was my past, at least, and I thought that this was good, but quite limiting. And let me explain why. And since then, I've tried to buy and read most. At least the most common and most famous books on business storytelling. So I really tried to do my research and to see who was really offering a compelling model for those companies who are faced with the necessity to adapt. And I find that the thing we hear over and over is, hey, a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you should have a story to be clearer and compel more people to buy your product or service or your stuff. And I think that's okay, but that doesn't cover the complete picture. I think that also many people say, hey, we should tell our story. What's your story? And that's a problem here, because you don't have a story. You have a multitude of stories that you need to orchestrate, combine together and connect so that people make sense of where they're headed in your company, or see where you're headed as a brand. And so I don't think that business storytelling in my context is enough. I think we need to start talking about narratives. And I make a difference between stories and narrative. Narratives are systems of stories. They're combinations of stories. They're like meta network of stories. And if you think about it, if you have a business, you have your own story that happened in the past as an entrepreneur. Then you may have a story for your brand. You may have another one that you use maybe for your team or for your recruits. And then you probably have stories that come back to you for when consumers, customers, clients have used your product and services. The challenge is, how do you reconcile these in a coherent narrative? And I wasn't able to find an answer, so it didn't exist. So I decided I would explore how to answer that key question for myself and for my clients. And I came up with this idea, this concept of strategic narrative, as I defined as a system of stories that you intentionally design to invite people on a new journey. It's a framework, it's a method. I have a model that the people I help use successfully now to drive better engagement, to drive companies through challenges like resistance through change and so on. And what I've observed over the time is that people will be glad to buy a story, right? I'll buy your story if you tell me one. In the literal term, also, I'll buy a book. I'll buy something that looks like a story. It is an audiobook, or I'll buy a movie, right? But what drives me today, and what I will be glad to participate, is a narrative. And people will buy a story, but they will almost die for a narrative. And that's a key difference here. We are in an era where we need businesses to think of themselves as movements, right? Because businesses have a great responsibility in the way this world stands and operates. And so if you think as your business as a movement, you need to have a narrative. You need to have a narrative that invites people to join you on a journey to transform either your company, your customers, or your environment, your ecosystem. So I'll pause here because I felt like this was a long answer to a simple question. So just to kind of get your reaction, but you've got the essence of what I do and what I believe in.
On Brand will be right back after this. LinkedIn believes B2B marketing can be to brilliant, be to bold, and be to breakthrough. How? With a platform purpose-built to make B2B mean more for your business. A platform with tools to help you build better relationships with your key customers, to boost your buyer journey while building your brand. A platform with the trusted data and lead generation you need to beat KPIs, drive ROI, and stand out amongst the competition. And with the targeting tools on LinkedIn, you can reach your precise audience right down to their job title, company name, location, and more, to make sure your ads are always being seen by those who matter. So get ready to boldly go where no marketers have gone before, because LinkedIn is where B2B is everything it can be. Rethink your B2B marketing LinkedIn ads and get a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply.
Facebook is building tools to enhance safety and security. Over 40 million people are using Facebook's Privacy Checkup each month. That's nearly 60 times the population of Washington, D.C. Learn more about the work ahead at facebook.com/action.
Now, back to the show. So I'm really glad that you laid out that definition and with the important prologue as well of businesses have all kinds of stories. Because full disclosure, when I gave the little stories everywhere, I mentioned that I'm going to be on your home turf next week in Seattle. I'm speaking at a conference, and I'm talking about brand storytelling. So I wanna not be one of the people that you're talking about, but I know when talking about story in broad strokes, a big kind of follow-up question is, okay, so what is this story? How do I use it? Is it a presentation that our sales team is giving? Is it the about page copy of our website? And I really like this hierarchy that you've laid out because, like you said, businesses have a number of stories, but the overall system of how they all work together, that's your narrative. So I guess my follow-up question in looking at that system is, which end do you start with? Do you start with, okay, this is the story we tell investors. This is the story that we tell in our marketing. This is the story. We've got these stories, and then we connect the dots and create the narrative? Or do we start from sort of the top down with what we want our narrative to be, and then work on bringing that to life throughout the various levels?
Well, you have kids, and do they play Legos?
Absolutely,
Right.
yes. I'm excited because Legos sounds like a great metaphor.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I'm about to use that as a metaphor. I have two kids too. They're Lego players, and they play Lego in two ways. They like to open the set and build what's on the picture, and then ultimately they're like, oh great, that was fun. Let's break this and let's put that in we have this big giant bin of Legos, and then let's rebuild something out of our mind. And so if all the stories in your business were different Lego bricks, right? You can do different things with it. But first you have to have a picture of what is it that you're trying to build. Oh, maybe I'll build a car, I'll build a spaceship, I'll build a boat, I'll build a house, I'll build a character. And so that's what the narrative needs to be telling you. So this exercise in building a strategic narrative is, first of all, an exercise in higher consciousness about what your business stands for in this world. What is it that you're trying to do? Are you trying to just do more money? Are you trying to impact your environment? Are you trying to make a specific kind of people happy? Are you trying to solve a challenge? And so many entrepreneurs will tell me, oh, I know what I want to do in this. It's XYZ. Say, I want to change the way we do cybersecurity in the retail industry. Actually, that's one of my clients' example. And that's great. Okay, well, that's good. You have a starting point. And then once we dive into how they do marketing, how they operate, how they design products and services, we realize that they're using the wrong Lego bricks. And they step back and they go, yeah, you're right. I was trying to build a ship, and now it looks like some kind of monster. And I didn't realize that. So where do you start from there? Well, there is a starting point, which to me is most effective to start with the founder, the CEO, the leadership of the company. Typically, these people should be in charge of saying where the ship wants to go and needs to go, right? And that's why they're steering. That's why my company is called MetaHelm. So I start with who's at the helm, and then from there we also want to consider that there is a crew on this ship. There is a team. There are investors. There are partners as well. So it's also the extended team that have a say, and that needs to also be able to say if they're on board. So there the metaphor continues. And so we reconcile all of the stories that people have in their mind, that we have on a website, that we have in the documents, that we have in the way we do things, and we rebuild that into a new narrative. Years ago, I was working for a company that came to me asking, like, could you help us rebrand? And I said, well, I'm not a rebrand expert, but sure, I'll give you my 2 cents. And I said, let's start with a very small piece of work, because I don't know if I can help you throughout the process, but I'll help you. And the first thing that I ask is, can you guys all send me all your key documents within the company? and I probably got 100 emails with attachments. It was before there was a Dropbox and all of that, those services. And I printed everything. So I printed a huge stack of paper. I stayed late at night, and then I laid out everything on the table of the boardroom for next day, the next day meeting morning. And I was going to dive into the content of each document, but then when I laid out everything on the table, the picture came, which was all of those documents looked like they came from a different company, in aspects, in tone, in everything. And so I showed that to the team, and I said, "Well, what do you see?" And they go, "Well, we see a bunch of documents." Like, okay, step back, but what do you really see? And someone said, "Yeah, we really see that it's totally fragmented. Did you guys? Are these our competitors' stuff?" Somebody also said that comment, like, "No, this is your company, and that's the problem we have. Is like, first, let's look at what is it that we're trying to build here. What is the coherent idea behind this company?"
Well, I'm so glad you brought up because there's any number of applications as we've been talking about here, but specific for, our on-brand conversation, the idea of branding and rebranding around all of this. And I also want to mention that that's a great visual section of the book. The story that you just told about all of these different inputs and applications, and then looking at bringing about some sort of wholesale change, and you've got all of these kind of crazy lines connecting all of these disparate pieces that you're talking about, and you liken the work without the narrative to that kind of old saying of putting lipstick on a pig.
Yes.
And it's easy to sit here and laugh at, but I see organizations struggling all the time with what they think is something that is rebranding focused.
Yep.
But they haven't done this homework that you're alluding to, this narrative homework. And because of it, they're doing things that are akin to lipstick or a new coat of paint that aren't going to bring about organizational change for the team and for whoever's at the helm.
Well, yeah, it's easy to think about this as like, hey, it's actually the surface of who we are that's going to help us fix, our problem. And it does help, but not profoundly. And it does help, but not profoundly. And what it does is that over time, you need to redo the work. Maybe one piece of a tip that I'd like to give our listener is, don't think about a strategic narrative as an act of literature. It shouldn't be something that you delegate to your marketing department or a branding agency because you think that they are better creative or writers than you. No, strategic narrative is an act of leadership. It's about making decisions. It's about clarity. It's about having the courage to disagree with your market if you need to disagree with your market. It's about having the courage also to bring people within the company to help you co-design and co-build that narrative. So, of course, marketing should be at the table. Of course, branding marketing should definitely be there, but not only. And it's not an exercise that should be led by the marketing department only. It should be an exercise led by the CEO. And so here's an example. I worked with Horizon Airline many years ago. It's a subsidiary of Alaska Airlines. And they were transforming their culture. And the CEO was wise enough to say, well, what's our narrative around this company? If we're going to shape a culture, the culture should be in service of the narrative. And he, from the get-go, thought about this as a very inclusive process. So inclusive that we ended up deciding to bring all employees in cohorts of 100 people. So there was about 3,000 employees. Don't exactly quote me on this, but about 3,000 employees in this subsidiary. And over the course of 6 months, we brought everybody through the same process. And we wanted to give a chance to everyone to have a fingerprint on this narrative. So this isn't your typical branding exercise. This is from the inside out, not from the outside in.
I love that story, and I want to rewind to something that you said to make sure folks heard it. I love the idea of strategic narrative is an act of leadership. And I think that's important. And I was gonna you read my mind like a good guest, because I was gonna say we need to hear an example of this, because I think too often, as we ensconce ourselves in roles that are higher in an organization,
Uh-huh.
we do think, oh, that needs to go to the special creative people. There's kind of this, I always say it's like the elementary school art class thing. We're
Mm-hmm,
afraid
mm-hmm.
that our picture isn't going to be as neat as as someone else's. And as leaders, we think, oh, that's for those people. But I think that story of how it should come from the top, and not just because I think it's always ends up weird where some of these tasks end up on an org chart. You mentioned culture
Yeah.
as shaping culture coming from a narrative, and so many of these things end up in odd places. We're so quick to kind of put them into a box on the org
Yeah.
chart.
Yeah.
Culture goes in HR, brand goes in marketing, and these are big things, and it does take a leader to bring them all together.
Yeah, you said something that I want to comment on. You said it has to come from the top. I think it's more, the idea is more that okay, let's assume the company is a pyramid. It has to be a meeting. It has to be a gathering from the top, the bottom, and the size of the organization. It should be led. It should be facilitated. I prefer the word facilitated
Yes.
by the people who are responsible for future value creation and steering the company. But I don't want people to leave this conversation thinking, oh yeah, that's yet another thing that happened in closed doors in a boardroom.
That's such a really good point of clarity too, because I was so excited about the idea of it being an important aspect of leadership,
It is, yeah.
uh, but yeah, not to the exclusion of everyone
Right.
else, and especially implying
Yeah.
anything top down, because mostly leadership. I like an act of or an aspect of, because I think sometimes a leader might be quick to think that I can just kind of be passive in it
Uh-huh.
and let it happen, when it should they should be involved, I guess, right?
Yeah, the leaders should be holding the pen for this exercise, or holding the wrench, or whatever tool, not
I,
watching somebody else's tool, using
yeah,
the tool. I want to also give another commentary here in terms of what is leadership. Leadership to me in this context is not a title. It's not a title. Sure, okay, let's say it could be a title, but it's not just a title. It's also who in the company wants to show up, whatever the title is, who has the appetite, who wants to show up, to participate in a conversation that has impact on the future of the brand. So when I work with CEOs, business owners, founders, and one of my questions very soon is, okay, who else do we need to involve in this? And it's very telling, the way they look
yeah.
at this question and their answer. And I really challenge them to think outside of their normal boundaries, and really consider people that they might not have thought about. And that's true inside and outside the organization as well.
That's such a great point, and I love because I think it's just like it's easy to get org chart focused on where branding
Right.
and culture goes. I think on leadership
Yeah.
too. A lot of
Yeah.
times, leadership itself is something that we talk about, and we think, oh, that's the CEO or a VP or C level. That's not me.
Yeah.
And I like the way you put that. And the other thing,
Mm-hmm.
when we were clarifying the role, I think the biggest thing comes back to what's one of my favorite sound bites of this conversation, and that's when you said it's an act of leadership. Because I think
Yeah.
that word "act" versus I like how you said holding the pencil, holding the baton. It's an act. It's an active role as
Yep.
opposed to a passive one.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. What are the actions then? Let's define what people should do. It's leading from a place of transparency. Being very true, honest, candid with what the company is facing and with your customers to what's going on, involving them also to find answers maybe. So I come from the first time I did a branding exercise a long time ago with traditional branding process. I came back from, and I was not leading it. I was working with big renowned branding agencies. I thought this is great, but it doesn't leave a lot of room for authenticity. We're building some kind of cover. We're building some kind of facade that is going to create problems. People are going to. I wonder if people are going to see themselves in this picture, and so I think over the years and more recently, there's so much more room. It's so much more okay to be transparent. To show up on social media as you are. Not just as a predetermined branding archetype, and so what are the acts of leadership here? So really being transparent as a leader is about why you started your company, or why you joined it if you didn't start it. What were the motivations? What were the values you wanted to defend? What was the status quo you were happy or excited to change? Another example I like to use here is the act of repeating yourself consistently and more than you need. And I heard a data point a couple weeks ago saying that, and the message is, you will be way better at your job as a leader if you repeat yourself 10 times more than you think you should. People will welcome repetition. They will be disappointed in the lack of information. I hope this is clear here. I'm not doing. I'm sorry. We might edit this out, but I may not quote this very well. What I'm trying to say is this: you will be much more efficient, much more trusted and recognized as a leader if you repeat yourself 10 times more than you think you should, as opposed to under communicating. So one of the acts of leadership that I hope you can do if you want to build a strategic narrative is consider this: is repeating yourself, owning your own message, and shaping it over time. So you invite people into reacting and giving you feedback to it.
Well said all the way around. I could talk about strategic narrative all day, as evidenced here, but it is time for me, Guillaume, to ask you for a brand that has made you smile recently.
So a brand that so recently I discovered I think it's a nonprofit called Girls Garage, and they are based in Berkeley, California. And what they do is that they teach women, they teach girls starting in their teenagers to overcome their fears and change the way they think about their role in society through building things. And that made me smile because it's a smile of hope. It's a smile of joy when I see the change that this can create. It's a company, it's a brand that provides an experience, but also that provides transformation in the environment, as I said at the beginning of the interview. You can look at this as, these are summer camps and classes and things that young women can do on their spare time as a hobby. I see just a greater purpose here. So it made me smile of joy.
Awesome. Well, I love that smile of joy and the on-brand nature of it, of who's showing up to transform something. Guillaume, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do? So
if people are like you, Nick, and want to continue to hear and talk about this all day long, my website is the best place to go. It's MetaHelm.com. And I have a pretty active email list. I published an article 3 times a week, typically Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that I will share on social media. The classic social media are, for me, LinkedIn. Please connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and sometimes Instagram.
All right. Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes at onbrandpodcast.com. Guillaume, thanks for being on brand with us.
Thank you so much, Nick. And I wish you the best in Seattle and can't wait to continue our conversation sometime soon.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.